Good morning. Today is the Sunday 19th of September, and in today's video, I would like to discuss through a case study in personal finance of whether trading as a business is suitable for you or not. We understand that in order to start trading, all you need is a demat account, and in order to open a demat account, all you need is a valid bank account and identity proofs. Making trading as a business having one of the lowest barriers to entry in the world. That is, it takes much more cost, time, and effort to set up even the smallest of business units or kiosks that you can think of in comparison to becoming a professional investor. This is known to every financial services provider, and consequently, individuals who have necessary documentation are proposed various financial instruments. Sometimes some of these individuals wander into the purview of what we call as derivative trading. The question is, should they continue to be there, or should they strive to improve from whatever level they find themselves currently at? We don't want to discuss an individual person or an experience per se, but are more interested in trying to identify a framework of decision making that will not only help us now, but might help anyone who comes within our sphere of influence who may be strongly considering the decision of aggressively pursuing a career in trading or investing. So, in order to begin this process, what I have done is I have simply laid out a table in front of you, and the hypothesis, that is, before we begin working on this table, the hypothesis is that your success in the market is directly correlated to your relationship with money. So I'll repeat that. Your success in the market is directly correlated to your relationship with money. Your relationship with money is objectively identified in your balance sheet. An individual's balance sheet can have many subcategories, but we are primarily concerned with three. And based on this information and through wide ranges, we will try to come up with an advice that is applicable to the segment, so that we are not discriminatory in whom we are offering the advice to in relation to how we perceive their inherent capabilities as a trader, a future trader or investor is, but rather we see where they are currently positioned in life and whether or not trading and investing makes sense for them. So we can see this table that is outlined here. On column A is simply the parameters A, B, C, D, E, F, G. From column B, C, and D, I have mentioned the assets, liability, and income source. And what we try to do is simply address whether or not they have these entries in their balance sheet or not through our interaction with the prospect. So let us consider case A, an individual who does not own any asset, who has only an ongoing liability, such as a business loss, and has no source of income. What would you advise this person? Would you advise this person to come into trading? I'm reasonably sure you wouldn't do so, and we certainly wouldn't do so. The reason being is that if the individual has no income, then in order to allocate capital in the business of trading, he needs to take on more liability, which basically puts him in what we would call as that quicksand. It's just a matter of time when the ship is going to sink. So the most practical advice to this particular individual could be to file for bankruptcy. You focus on getting basic insurance, you focus on your PPF, and you file for bankruptcy in order to safeguard yourself from the provisions of the ongoing liability. And as a financial services provider, if you find a case like this, your focus will be to see what can be done in order to minimize this liability. So clearly, an individual to whom we advise file for bankruptcy, we cannot advise become a trader. Let's move on to the next one. Now, this individual advances. Let's say he has the ongoing liability, but not the same individual, but another case where they also have an asset. A simple example could be a student who has inherited a house but also has an ongoing student loan. What should the student do? In such a case, there is no doubt that we want to get rid of this liability. The question is, should we square off the asset in order to get rid of this liability? Or should we rather focus on building an income source in order to square off this liability? Given that there is no income source, it is clearly more relevant for the individual to pursue security of income. That is, the student who has a house but an ongoing student loan is better off pursuing any activity that secures his income. This security of income then comes in the next category, where now let's assume the same student has an income source, also has the ongoing student loan, and also has an asset which is called as a house. What would you tell this individual to do with this particular income source? You would want to square off liability, right? We want to get into a position where we are now moving into the fourth part of the case study, where you have an income source. So let's say someone who's at the age of 30, 32, they are employed, they are in say middle management or perhaps better. They have an income source, they also have some assets, which means that they could have maybe a house, they could have inherited some family land, they could have a shop or a commercial office. And the good thing is they also do not have any liability, that is, they don't have any mandatory outflows, which is cash negative. That is, it's not an outflow for ppf, it means we are considering an outflow for like an emi or a legal liability. In such a case, this individual, what would you advise him? Because now we have security of income and we have assets. Now, what we would advise this individual is that it's time now to create multiple assets in order to create multiple incomes, which means at this point, the individual now qualifies for investments, which means an individual who has no liability is the first case study or the first case in point where the individual can begin his investments. So it doesn't matter whether the individual is at the age of 18 or at the age of 80. It is best when the individual has no ongoing liability that the individual consider his journey of becoming a professional investor or a professional trader. Now, once you begin to invest, which basically means once you begin to set aside capital in order to create assets, you are going to have obviously what we will see in EFG, multiple assets. But the question now is, do you want to take on the liability or not? The most common example is you will often find individuals who reach the age of 40 when they make an investment decision. It could be buying out another house, it could be buying out another office, it could be buying out some agricultural land. Now, that payment could either be made in full, that is, through the savings that they have had through their income, or it could be made in part, that is, part savings and part by taking on liability. In other words, these individuals, despite having liability, have created a liability in order, have willingly created a liability in order to create assets. And these assets which are created, which we can see in F, which retain the liability, I mean, there is an ongoing liability, you just bought a land and you made say 25% down payment, the remaining is on loan, is expected to, what we do is create multiple income sources. And the objective of these multiple income sources, of course, is to square off all liabilities. So this is basically where we get our description of what we will call as an upper middle class, rich, and ultra high net worth individual. An upper middle class is an individual who have or typically have very minor liabilities, which is generally against an asset. And they also have secure income sources. And they are trying to now create multiple assets. Once they successfully create multiple assets, which in turn generate multiple secure income sources, you can officially say they are rich. And the ultra rich are individuals who can now create multiple asset classes without taking on any liability. The best thing about the market is that once you come into the market without any liability, you can create as many assets as you want without having to ever undertake any external liability, which means that once you reach the point D, you can now invest into hundreds of stocks, hundreds of bonds, several currency pairs, and commodities without having to take any bank loan. Which means that from having a simple asset income no liability account to having multiple asset multiple income no liability account, the jump from D to G can be made without having to go through without having to undergo through the process of any payout pressure. This is what we factor when we try to identify whether or not an individual should enter the market. Often retail traders are complaining about the margins that the exchanges are raising. They say it takes 2 lakhs for a lot. But it also takes only 40,000 rupees to trade gold. And it takes 2,000 rupees to trade US dollar INR. What we don't understand is that why an individual who cannot afford to pick up one lot of stock future is not building on his or her skill set in order to trade 10 lots of US dollar INR. If you are interested in your journey as a professional trader, then the constraints of any professional world, such as capital constraints, constraints of time, constraints of availability, are applicable to you. Your talent is not the only bottleneck. For example, the tea shops boy near my house, he has incredible talent. Ideally, he could have been a chef in a 7-star hotel. So, what does he do? He stops working within the framework of his constraint. So, if you are a small trader coming into the market with any kind of liability, which means if you are in the category A, B, and C, I would bet that there is a 1 in 100,000 chance that you are going to be profitable at the end of 5 years if you are a derivative trader, that is, you're trading future and option. I'll repeat. If you are a trader who currently has an ongoing liability, such as student loans, home loans, family members with disability, medical expenses, and you are challenged in terms of secured income sources and do not have multiple asset classes, that is, you're falling in the category ABC, your probability of success is less than 1 in 100,000, where success is defined as being net profitable after a period of 5 years in the derivative market. If, however, you are in category D and upwards, your probability of success is 0.4%. So, even for individuals who have relatively more secure income sources or a better personal balance sheet, the odds are not that fantastic, but clearly 0.4% is multi times more than 1 in 100,000. And therefore, if a key takeaway from this video has to be, is that trading is only applicable for you if you do not have any liability. If you have any liability, your purpose of financial activity is to secure your income source, square of that liability. When you reach the phase D, that is, you have some assets, you have an income source, and you're willing to take your chances, at that point in time, you could consider your journey as a professional trader or an investor. This journey has a 0.4% chance of success, which, if you're willing to accept, 0.4% chance of success in derivative trading, which, if you're willing to accept, then you're welcome. I hope the points captured in this video help you in some way. Have a good weekend. Thank you.